So detecting pedophile behavioral indicators on Torrent networks in Trinidad and Tobago, the whole problem being approached here. Now, this presentation is basically a thought process, and it's more of a discussional tone, that a discussion I sort of had with myself that I would like to share with you all. I was approached by a former graduate of the criminal psychology department at UE. And the problem presented to me was that in studying certain topics of child abuse in that faculty, they're often limited on different types of data, as opposed they mainly just have profiles that victims would tell them upon interviews and whatnot. So her problem that she came to me with was, how can we learn about the viewership of child porn offenders in Trinidad and Tobago? Is there even an audience? And if so, to what extent? And the main objective for this was, we don't have policies with regard to this topic. And should we even think in the direction that, do we need policies? And it's basically to do some groundwork to even know if certain things need to be addressed. So the overall point of my thought process is to figure out how to frame a research paper, or how to frame research on this topic to make it usable in some way. And even if a research paper or usable research can be done on this topic for Trinidad and Tobago. So it started out with just looking at the domain and trying to understand what pedophile behavior basically is. And they look at it in a case where it's behavioral indicators, because it's not purely just indicators, because the indicators, according to the behavioral analysis unit at the FBI, they said the indicators don't help you as much because it basically tells you nothing. Because when you look at the pedophile definition, it tells you that well, it's a bit of a vague way to give a pedophile context. And it's like a recurrent, intense urge that they have for at least a 6-month period that involves some sort of sexual activity with a prepubescent child. Prepubescent is one of the most important words with pedophile behavior. Excuse me, sorry. Right, so that means that it's the age right before a preteen. That's around 10, 11 generally. And then always under 13 years old. So it's always before puberty. They categorize it in a way where they have certain levels of offense penalties. So we go all the way from the age of a baby to that prepubescent childhood age. And one key thing I'd like to bring your attention to, which I didn't take on the first time I read the paper on it, was that they basically verified that pedophiles almost always collect this sort of material. And that word collection, they actually emphasized that the collection is a type of behavior that you always see with them. And again, I did not think that collection was something important, but it is used in profiling them because they collect it like an addiction. So it's not just simply viewing this casually, it's like how a hoarder would hoard uncontrollably. They build up their collections in a very, over years. So that collection is actually worth a lot to them, not financially, but it's considered a very, very prized possession. So relating to the actual study at hand, if we are to frame this into something usable, and we need to figure out if it's being used and how is it being used. So in practice, in the United States, one of the instances is that, the FBI uses this torrent. It's a modified torrent called torrential downpour. And actually, let me come across to this slide first. Sorry about that. So torrential downpour, it's basically, it pretends to be a BitTorrent user, right? And the difference with their modified BitTorrent protocol compared to normal torrent protocol is that it's almost using the same method of searching and finding the file. So I'm pretty sure we all use torrents. We all know that it's peer-to-peer file sharing, and it's really good for downloading really fast files, large files in a fast manner. And we do this in bits and pieces from multiple sources. So because it's from multiple sources and bits and pieces, we get it downloaded. Now, the difference is that the FBI claims that the difference with theirs is that they download all the entire file from one source. So that download of one source makes it more credible to stand up in a court of law. So that brings us to the point here now where we have between 2015 to 2019, there has been quite a number of cases that popped up because of this what they call software-related arrest. But up to 2019, I actually tried to get reports more recent than that, so apologies. But there were 12 cases that were dismissed after the defense team argued that we can't submit this as credible evidence. And one of the reasons for this was that the FBI can't give out everything on their tracking software. So they needed to hand over everything and in detail. And because of that level of what the lawyers would phrase as lack of trust, it was enough in a way to question how credible this data could be used against a criminal. But that's just one aspect of how the torrent sort of data could be used to help reduce child abuse, since that's the original, the main objective here. But let's look at New Zealand. I like the approach that they use in New Zealand. This is, it's different because just now we spoke about looking at the child pornography offenses as in you're downloading it, but they used it as a probable cause in order to find more substantial charges on that person. But in this case, in New Zealand, they have this Department of Internal Affairs, and they do a combination of teamwork where they have like covert teams that are digitally based. Digitally based in the sense that they either monitor the traffic of illegal child pornography, and actually they don't call it child pornography, they call it child sexual abuse imagery, because they want to put that definitive line between what is considered child pornography and regular pornography, because they consider this to be a type of sexual abuse that is very different, and it's the type of people are profiled differently. So another main reason they want to change the term in New Zealand is because they said that it dismisses the significance of the issue by calling it child pornography, because it's a bit too everyday-ish. It's like a term that we don't see the significance of the abuse, and the abuse meaning that it happens, the behavior, when I mean to profile someone, that behavior, it escalates, and there are cases where there are horrific cases where we have babies and toddlers between the ages of a few months to 3 months old, where the level of abuse is really, really tragic. So depending on the type of content, or if you're trading, so in New Zealand, they categorize it, if you're trading child pornography content, or if you're in possession. So if you're in possession, you may just get a fine below 2,000. But if you're trading, and to what extent, you can get jail time or up to 20,000 and a fine, or both. So what I liked is how they broke down the methods of detection, because I was curious if we were to get an idea of in Trinidad, how are we getting any sort of gauge for a CPO in our in our country? I mean, we can't have a survey and walk around and ask people. So, with their mode of detection, I'm not sure who did this self-reporting. So apparently, one guy went and reported himself. But that's actually good because some of them actually know that they have a problem, like an addiction, and they don't want to hit anyone or do anything in person. And you have rare instances of self-reporting. Family members, community, spouse, chat room conversations, and the most prevalent one was from the Department of Internal Affairs. Like I said, they have this digital team that do covert operations. There was a case where they combined monitoring the offenders' downloads together with you. They used that as a probable cause to see, okay, let's try to get a warrant for this guy. They got a warrant to investigate him further. When they investigated him further, they realized that there's a user on BitTorrent they were trying to find. He was providing a vast amount of really bad child pornography. And the guy that they were in contact with, but they were chatting with him as a seller of a child, he agreed to meet and buy a child, and they arrested him and he was sent to prison. So the extent that they take it seriously in New Zealand is on a different level to to Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, I'm just comparing. I don't even know why I'm bothering to compare that right now, but it shows you a difference because you may wonder this may not be something that we need to consider for policy making, but it's nice to see other methods that another country may be doing. Their population, it's about 8 million, around 8 million, Trinidad being 1.5 million. So that can give you a gauge of how we can try to relate numbers if we want to do a study in Trinidad and do a comparison to a country with policies. Some of these guys who were sentenced, they got home detention, imprisonment. Some of them got charges, but the supervision, which is what most of them got, that includes some of it is kind of mandatory therapy they have to go to. Some of it also includes under the supervision, it's home detention with checks on them or community service or being checked into an institute. So to reiterate again, sorry, for New Zealand, their aim is to get to the problem before the person can hurt a child and to treat the person if it's treatable, to put them to have a normal life, but a life that would not be potentially to build up in their 30s, 40s, 50s to 60s to escalate into actually hitting a child online. However, they do take an interesting approach in New Zealand as well, where they in the Department of Internal Affairs, they discussed that merely watching, a lot of these times when they arrested people, they pleaded, we were just watching, we haven't hurt anyone, you don't have any evidence that we've hurt anyone or taken any photos of our own, of any kids that we know. Their argument is that the industry of child sexual abuse is so really, it's really bad. It's gruesome in a lot of cases, and they don't want to have they don't want to contribute to it. So they look at you like you're watching it, you're contributing to it. So they want to crack down even on that, to crack down on the industry as a whole. No, so let's jump across to Trinidad and Tobago and get an idea of what's going on before we look at how we can analyze this data. So other authorities, other organizations have done their studies and their data collection. And this was a report published in 2018 where they had the overall different types of abuse for kids. And this was about, okay, let's see, 23.1%. The largest share was contributing to sexual abuse being the leading cause of child abuse in Trinidad, second being neglect, and then physical abuse. But again, this is based on only if someone calls or the victim reports it either at that time or years after. There have been instances where the person came forward 10, 20 years after when they're a full-blown adult. Sorry. So from the same study that I was quoting here, the Children's Authority of TNT 2018 report, most of the images are from that report. And they had 4,400 cases. This shows the distribution of the age ranges under a year, and then 16 to 17. This color is the sexual abuse cases. This one is the physical abuse, and this one is neglect. You will see that the prepubescent age, which is the 10 to 13 years old, has the second highest, and this one, 14 to 15 years old, being the highest. But keep in mind one important aspect that Dr. Diyal Singh, and to reinstate the credibility of my presentation, I mean Dr. Varma Diyal Singh, it's a different one in case anyone was wondering. He stated that between 2015 to 2018, actually, when he looked at all the cases, he said that was just a drop in the bucket of reports of the cases that actually happen. And he actually phrases it as an epidemic in Trinidad and Tobago, given how bad it is. And it's much more than the figures we see. Also, another thing to factor in is that the ages under 1 and then under 3, we can't say that it doesn't really happen as much in these instances, because how are they going to report it? And 2, there's a high chance that they would not remember, even at this age of 3 years old, and the person doing it could be close to them, and no one else may not even suspect it. Because Dr. Gabriel Hussein from UE as well too, she said that quite often in Trinidad and Tobago, regardless of what age it is, but I'm looking at the kids that are smaller, the offenders can be at a person who you will never suspect involved with a child's life, or in a field, a career field, where they are in close proximity to kids, and no one will question their authority, like a teacher, a coach, a priest, or anything that you can try to be near kids, or mentor, or Big Brother, certain programs like that. So don't look at this as a hard and fast, like, yes, it happens most to kids in this age. We just don't have the data. Then we look at the abuse by gender, and the same thing goes here. Yes, it looks as for sexual abuse, you have predominantly girls, but again, you can have boys that would just report it less, or people know of it less, because these are just based on individual reports. If you call a hotline, or if a girl reports it, there's a psychological element there, with a boy being more hesitant to discuss the issue. So again, this is the data, yes, but it's to what extent is it the truth? Does it reflect the truth? Then we focus in on the cases with boys only, just to compare the amount, the variation with the age groups. With boys, you'll see that this was out of 148 cases over a 9-month period. And this was from the statistical report on sexual abuse against kids from 2016. This was the one I could have found where they just segmented boys, and 26% being the most 4 to 6 years old. that is different to the other distribution where we saw the 14 to 15 being the highest. So this little age at 4 to 6 being the most prevalent. And like Dr. Dialsing said, this 148, we can't just say, okay, yeah, it's just 148 cases. It's well, first 148 cases in our population. That if it were that number, it was still alarming. But again, it's a drop in the bucket. So continuing from the abuse of boys, this is a map of Trinidad and Tobago that shows the distribution of the reports. Now, this is based on incidental reporting, so it's not a true reflection of the actual distribution, because we need to consider, yes, the places that had the most were Sawa Lavental, then Tunapuna Piarco, and Cuva Tabaquit Telparo. To a lesser extent, we have Point Fortin, Rio Claro, and Sangre Grande being some of the lowest. However, if you do a Google search on the Google Trends, I'm sorry, I should have put that in the presentation, I only just remembered. This was part of what I was doing for the study in order to gauge the behavior in Trinidad and Tobago. And in Google Trends, when you look at certain types of abuse, you will see that the region of Sangre Grande is actually one of the highest. So that shows a type of curiosity. So maybe this, when it comes to actually reporting it, we don't know why someone is reporting it. Is it because they have more organizations, more counselors in schools, or they make you more, you're more aware that you have the right to report it? So there are many different issues as to why the awareness, education, or the availability of social programs can be distributed differently, causing these numbers to vary. So then all this data that I just showed you for Trinidad and Tobago, the data gathering technique, the extensive data gathering technique was all based on a hotline, and it's all based on total calls that they received. The lines were up, they said, to 99.9% uptime. So they wanted to show that they would not have had calls that they did not receive. So in all of these over 19,000 calls, they said that, okay, 44,000 were valid abuse cases. But given that this is a data gathering method, together with Dr. Hussein spoke in one of her papers that she's working on an elaborate interview research method to interview adults who were abused below the age of 5 and to study their responses to get a better gauge on how to treat victims and to psychologically get them to improve and go through life that way. But again, combining data gathering for these calls and then interview methods from the victims, it's very limiting to really getting a gauge out there on how to profile persons who we're missing. Who are all these people we're missing? So that's something that we need to consider in Trinidad. Maybe we need another form of gathering insights. So that brings me to, okay, why can't we look at insights from regular legal pornographic websites? For instance, Pornhub, they have actually data scientists who work on very elaborate insights to study how people, their psychology behind the different categories they watch, and they look at trends over time, or they try to do correlations with people's viewing patterns and their preferences. So these insights on certain sites like these, they're legal, and the content that we're looking for is illegal. So we can't use the insights from websites like these, even if we're able to get it, to solve our problem. And in the New Zealand study, they stated that most of the offenders for the for child pornography actually got their material from peer-to-peer networks. And it was actually a big difference. And obviously this is a new form of getting your content. So this is actually something funny. So the creators, not the creators, but the spokesperson on an article for the discussing the insights for Pornhub said that if there's a thing out there, there's a category for it. So in 2019, the most popular search game-wise was Fortnite on their site, and then it changed in 2020 to Among Us. Yes, that's a category. But again, it does not help us because it does not have the type of content we want. So again, we're stuck. How are we going to get the data that we need? We have no insights. We can't go letting people call in. So that's when we get into the real part of the project, which is using open source intelligence tools, which is what we call OSINT. And OSINT is a nice way to consider getting data that is publicly accessible. When it's publicly accessible, that doesn't mean it's always just, in your face. You need to search for it or find tools to obtain it, but it is publicly accessible. And this is an option, whether you're in the field of analyzing data or developing machine learning models on data. We need to get adventurous sometimes in how we source that data. So OSINT is is the direction I'm thinking to take with this. So to familiarize yourself with OSINT, I have some tools that I find particularly interesting if you would like to look at it yourself. And one is called Shodan, and it's a search engine, but it's not what you would think a boring search engine is. You use it, you can go to their sites and you can use it to find IoT devices that you can't really search for. I mean, we have IoT devices surrounding us all the time. We often don't realize how vulnerable these things are, and we usually don't know how to search for this. So Shodan is very powerful in allowing you to do this, and it gets report vulnerabilities for such devices, but also it allows you to scan to find publicly accessible databases with vulnerabilities. Then another use that you may find more common in data science world is if you're doing web scraping, which we're all familiar with, but then that brings us into another deeper aspect, like a deep web database. So if you were to search or scrape a website that stores something, for instance, a police precinct, if they were to store something on their deep web database, you can't access it by doing a normal scraping. So you can do a thing where you use an OSINT tool and you mimic how you would access it through the website interface, and you access their database files through the OSINT, using your OSINT tools as if you were sending a request the same way you would through your website. And then this one I actually find particularly interesting given what's going on right now. You can use it even for epidemics. And there's Global Public Health Intelligence Network. And this is a semi-automated early warning system. And it scans continuously, like for keywords, chats, or news headlines, or different publications constantly in 9 languages. And it looks for potential signs of disease outbreaks. And there was a paper published in 2015. So that paper actually said they used the system in order to detect an Ebola outbreak, actually. So I found that to be really interesting because they said only the system detected it, and it detected it before anyone else did. And then there's the search engine that I like to use. It is an OSINT tool. It's a clustering search engine, and you guys can check it out to use when you're doing your research and whatnot. Carrot 2. So you can just Google Carrot 2 and try using it when you want to do research or just it's really nice. I hope you like it. So that's just a background on OSINT tools and some other tools that you can get yourself familiar with if you're interested. But now it comes to the point where we choose our own OSINT tool. The OSINT tool that we use is called Recon Spider. Well, not use, but intended to use would be Recon Spider. And Recon Spider is a combination where we use reconnaissance and also a spider. So we're trying to obtain information with a combination of methods. And then also we're using a spider to browse and crawl through the web to find whatever it is we're trying to detect. So in our case, we can explore and use the other options, but the option that we want is option 10, which is the torrent option. And Recon Spider, there's some literature on it, and you can clone the repo on GitHub if you want to experiment and use it. It's really quick to install, and it's a really advanced OSINT framework, and it's excellent for scanning IP addresses. So that's why I chose Recon Spider. And if you choose the 10th one, for the torrent option, you enter your IP address and it gives you an output similar to this. So it gives you your country, your ISP, and then it has the category and the name of the movie and the date and the size. So it's nothing as sophisticated as what the FBI is using with their entire modified BitTorrent protocol. We have to stick to just using monitoring or just data gathering methods. So I noticed that we can get all the IP addresses easily. And I found average 500,000 IP addresses. It will be a bit of a task to do this for this volume, but I was thinking to do it for a sample size, but depending on the results, if it's not sufficient, if we're not getting enough of the domain that we want, we may have to stretch that sample size to be a bit bigger. So that's what I'm currently working on to make it as practical as possible, because I have a feeling that, I mean, if we test only, for instance, 10,000, that would not be sufficient, because we need to keep in mind that how many people torrent, we're evading a large percentage of the population. But again, this is not to get an idea of everyone. It's a means of extrapolation to get an idea of what happens, because currently we have no idea. And so if you want to try to Recon Spider, you can check it out yourself, but if you can't find it, you can just let me know. So my trend that I'm aiming for right now to use this data is to collect the data with OSINT. Yes, we've covered that. But to make it more interesting and to do some better quality analysis. I know it's not going to be the most interesting form or type of machine learning methods that we will be doing, but I still want to do some sort of analysis. So I'm thinking to create a custom data set, and that will help us build our classifier in order to maybe classify child porn from non-child porn, because we will have a lot of overlap with certain words and regular adult pornography. So the classifier can be a bit tricky for that. And one downside for this is that we're not able to get a gauge of the search terms that the person searched for, because that has a lot of power in it, the actual search term. So we don't have that on our side, but we have to, go with what we have. And I would like to find a keyword dictionary, not find one, but try to make one, because there's another study that was done. I have the reference attached to the end of this lecture. They created a list of keywords that they believed an offender would use to either search or recognize in torrent titles. So you can do a bit of not trial and error, but from previous research, build keywords based on that, but also from using our own torrent titles and clustering these titles, that can help us also try to come up with some keywords. So it is important that we do some clustering for the titles. Hopefully then when we do the clustering, I'm thinking we can analyze this a bit, see, okay, persons who are interested in this genre of download, what else is their pattern? Are we seeing large downloads of, I'm just guessing here, but child shows? Because is it that they have kids? Or, you know, I'm just looking at what patterns can we see? And then I would like to compare our results to a country with child pornography offender policies like New Zealand. So we can try to show, okay, the countries with policies, maybe we can show that over, let's say, 5-year periods, how this changed, and then compare it to Trinidad if we get enough, if the sample size is enough. So this is generally how I'm thinking to go about it. And the reason I presented it is so that you guys can maybe critique me or tell me that, okay, yeah, this makes sense, but maybe I have this idea. So tell me what you think based on how I'm approaching this to frame it into a good research publishable paper that can also be of use to build on in Trinidad and Tobago when it comes to child protection policies. These are some of the main references I used. This was the one with the public health one, the epidemic one I was talking about. If you would like any of them, I can always send them to you. And that's it for now. So if you guys have any ways that you may think that I can improve it or think about it differently, feel free to let me know.
Yeah, thanks for that, Nidia. Very, very interesting stuff. I have a couple of questions about the OSINT tool. So from what you said, you provided with an IP address and it provides you with the torrent information, right?
Yeah.
But where does it get the torrent information from?
Where does it get the torrent information?
Yeah.
Well, from what the general thing I read on it was that, okay, when you enter the IP, they're using, the torrent has the instructions on where to find the files, right? So all I got the explanation for it was that it looks for the client, their BitTorrent client, and it's scraping once it's basically just scraping the text from those attributes. But honestly, as in how it's actually done, I don't know how it actually detects the torrent itself when it comes to like transferring the actual data. No.
Oh, okay. So it if the IP address is active at that point in time, then it would detect stuff. Otherwise, if it's no longer participating, then it won't be able to find anything.
It's historic data, so you get the historic downloads. Well, now even the Reckon Spider gives you the historic downloads up to a month. The thing is that our IP addresses change, right? So right. Yeah, so that's the thing is it's going to give you a gauge on the number, but it's not going to give you a gauge on the user. For instance, if it's for an entire month, because for instance, if you get 50 at this IP for a month, that you can look at the volume, but not the actual user. So we can't profile users properly with this unless we are able to do it for short periods of times only, like only for this IP address for this week only, which is last data.
Okay. So you may be capturing a single user multiple times, right? Because over the month, they may have used multiple IP addresses, and so you will detect them separately for those each IP address.
Yeah, that's a problem. But what I'm hoping is that if you downloaded one thing now, if we see a repeat download, it will most likely not be the same user. For that particular title, like that, if we're thinking it's a repeated download, it would actually be hopefully a different user for that same title.
Okay, good. Yeah, it should provide a rich source of data, and well, I mean, you can do this in parallel, right? I mean, you could assign subsets of the IP addresses to different people and have them do it, and be able to do it much faster. Yeah, be able to do it faster.
And you could even like maybe run it on different virtual machines too.
Right. Well, yeah, that as well.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, I look forward to seeing the actual results. I know you're still trying to formulate what you want to do, because there are some tricky things here with being able to identify what is child pornography and what is not, etc. And do you? I didn't check, but do you have any seeding information as well in the?
That's the unfortunate thing. I don't, because I wanted that, because that's one of the things that they do with the more sophisticated monitoring. They look at the amount you seed, because one of the guys they caught in New Zealand who was just downloading, he was actually one of the largest seeders that they were actually looking for. They were looking for him in particular because he was one of the biggest seeders in New Zealand. But yeah, we don't have that, unfortunately. But the main thing, if you want to look at it from a law enforcement point of view, you want to find some sort of probable cause to investigate the person further, because then that leads to either confiscation or even deeper warrants to give you deeper access to the person, unknowing to them. So it's mainly to keep getting a step closer and closer to building a stronger case. But I do wish that we could have gotten the seeding information.
Okay, nice, thanks. Interesting work, thanks.
But you would be able to reconstruct the seed information from the IPs. I mean, a seed should be online most of the time, right? And then you can track it from there.
How?
So the Recon Spider thing would give us exchanges, data flows between two IPs, right?
We're only getting the name of it's scraping. Like, it's just like if you scrape a website, so it's only going to give you the title, the time, and the category, and the size of the file.
That it's trying to download, or
that was downloaded historically.
And it will tell you the source IP downloading from, or just say I'm just downloading it.
Yeah,
so if it
No, sorry, it doesn't give it the source. It doesn't scrape that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because imagine like on your BitTorrent, it's scraping, that interface you see where you have your downloaded and you have the title and stuff. It's like it's just like scraping that, yeah. I wish we could have gotten the seeding data, because that would have been more useful.
So a couple of years ago, like maybe 2012 or thereabout, there was a project locally that looked at this particular issue. And that at that particular time, what was done was there was a Russian company which was offering like a data set essentially, where they were looking at this from the perspective of like how the media companies would go after people that are sharing their content, which is that you look at the actual torrent itself and you look at who's in the swarm, right? So what they did was that they basically, it appeared they went through all of like Pirate Bay and just looked at all the torrents, essentially joined the swarms, and downloaded the IP addresses, and they were doing this on a regular basis. And I think they went out of business, and when they were going out, they released this huge data set. And so it basically had like over time, and they had disaggregated it by countries. So that had, we got that information, we started a conversation with the police, and that conversation essentially, so some of the problems that you have here locally at that particular time was the dynamic IP address is one, and then in order to, but there are ways to overcome that, and then, but in order to prosecute, getting evidence is also problematic because there was, so at the time, you know, people were sort of sophisticated in the way they were storing the information, and encryption was being used, and you could not at that time force someone to give up encryption, like keys to the encryption. So if they use TrueCrypt or whatever it is, and you know, you want them to decrypt whatever it was, you couldn't actually get them to do that essentially. And then since then, what has happened is that we've seen the network is so it's sort of bifurcated, and you have now where people are producing their own content and not sharing it, right? With the advent of cell phones and whatever it is. So, you know, you abuse, you take, and most recently, I think there was an example of this where there was a security guard that got caught with a whole bunch of stuff on his laptop. And then you have people that are going like using the deep web, right? Using Tor, etc., which makes it even more difficult now to use that torrent approach, which I just described, of looking at the actual torrents and looking at the swarms and looking at the IPs and just monitoring those. So that's really how that was at the time. This was like probably 2013 or thereabout. And as I said, those are the difficulties, and it was never really pursued because of, you know, just didn't have the resources. But the approach that you mentioned is pretty good though. But if you could actually find like actual torrents, right? I mean, the keywords are interesting as well, but if you could look at, I don't know the extent now on some of these torrent sites, etc., but collecting the torrents might be a good way to start, and then looking at the swarms, right?
Okay.
And seeing essentially who is there. I don't know if you'd find anybody from Trinidad, but that's like a surefire way to like identify, you know, because I understand what the categories that you're getting, but again, I don't know how precise you'd want to be, etc., with respect to content, category, etc. So, but that's one way. But again, you have like your the problem of legality essentially, right? So that's also another issue because when you tap the swarm, you have to expose yourself.
Okay.
So just some things to consider. But it's a good project, and it's something that I know, like in law enforcement in some circles, it's something that has propped up from time to time. You know, like how do we do this? It's pretty good.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
I was wondering, provided you could be indemnified by a particular law enforcement agency locally, couldn't you just honeypot this? Like rename a file, I don't know, not put up a real something and just like see who comes to it. Provided it was legal, of course.
Actually, that they do a covert thing similar to that in New Zealand, where they try to trap people. So like the main guy who would be seeding a lot, right? They may create something and just it's more for opening dialogue so that he would want to come to you as a provider and like they would chat after, you know, seeing that, yeah, I'm this source, I'm this person. And then they lured him in actually, not from the download, but afterwards from chatting with him and earning him his trust and stuff. So they have their tactics they use with the covert stuff. So, but they don't like to reseed anything. That's their thing. They don't like to put the content out there for other people to actually download. That's one of the things they stipulated on for their tactics, if it's true. But as in, you can just put something with a fake name and see who downloads it.
Yeah, of course. I wouldn't, you know, support distributing abuse. But like if you rename a file,
Yeah.
and just kind of see who joins this form as a, you know, as Derek was mentioning,
Yeah.
it'd be a pretty easy way to scan IPs. Of
I
course,
think that's a good trap.
as Derek was mentioning, I guess most people would probably be utilizing VPNs, which won't really be a reliable source. So yeah.
Yeah, because we have ways to like that makes our sample set like smaller and smaller sample size, right? But and ways that we're not getting the truest number, but it still gives us an indication as opposed to only having reports from individual persons. So that's just the main aim is to try to get data somehow as opposed to just having the reports called in or from filing reports at a police station. So the trap is actually a good approach that how the COVID strategists, what they try to come up with. So coming up with something like this can actually show the need for not just the policies, but to have a branch in law enforcement to come up with covert digital teams, digital operations, where we form strategies to identify people. Obviously, everyone we identified would not be a person of interest. So then you find ways to investigate them further and realize, oh, wait, maybe we should flag this one and find out more about him. So it's basically like a first step. And then we can use a strategy similar to what you say. It's like a way to propose, yeah, we should have funding to have this arm in law enforcement to do strategies like this. I find it's really cool how they do it in New Zealand.
So one thing I don't know if they do, if it comes up in literature a lot, but like information hiding is a perfect, well, it's a perfect, but it was like you can embed the data in other data and then share that. So I don't know how sophisticated these people are, but I mean it's been around for a while, so that it might be a certain portion where they're sharing seemingly, you know, like a normal movie, but within that movie the illegal stuff is embedded.
There's as you mentioned that there's another OSINT tool. I can't trying to remember the name right now while you're talking. I think it could be Spiderfoot, but I don't know if it's Spiderfoot. But if it is Spiderfoot, it's similar to a Metasploit framework, and what it does exactly the problem that you're bringing up now. It looks for embedded features that you would hide. So if you have content, for instance, a certain type of file, whether it's a music file or video file or something, and you have it hidden, then this can bypass the first layer and find the next level of data that it's looking for. I think it's Spiderfoot, but I will check that. And if anybody wants to know, I would let you know after. But yeah.
That'd be interesting because that's basically using one stack analysis to figure out. Yeah, but so the thing with those methods is they're not, what to say, it's just a function. It's just a function of the embedding scheme, you know. So again, it comes back to the sophistication of the network. So if everybody using like a standard, let's say like the significant bit approach or something, then we know exactly the feature to look for. You know, so it's really like a cat and mouse game. But assuming that they use like, I don't know, some industry standards for sharing the information, you should be able, I think it's conceivable, you should be able to at least reasonably tell if a file has it or not. So it's just a little caveat, because this is actually why I study for PhD, right? So
yeah, I remember your work is really cool.
Yeah, so the distortion is a function of the data and the embedding strategy. So what I'm saying is, if the embedding strategy is not popular enough or it's sophisticated enough,
it could be a good passive.
Exactly. It would not be detected at all. Like that's actually what is what steganography does. is it tries to reduce the distortion while increasing the embedding capacity within the features, right?
Okay,
So
you phrase it in a better way just to understand what really happens, because I know it from the practical sense, not the theoretical sense. Like exactly like what you're saying, if you want to create, it doesn't have to be for this particular instance that we're talking about with this content, but if I want to create some sort of tool to get everything you type in your computer. Now, most of the standard sort of keyloggers you want to get, most software would detect it and block it. But if you were to create sometimes a really unsophisticated sort of homemade little customized thing, it will be passively able to seep through and it wouldn't recognize it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, the drawback with that now is how do you, it's always the first problem of sending the decoder to the masses, right?
Yeah.
So it's always a sort of a trade-off, you know, because like the more popular technique might be widely distributed, so they have a wider market, but the more sophisticated technique now, how you're getting it across. And you know, I'm sure there are like back channel sites and something where they like post a pop up post on some random forum and everybody just download it in a minute and delete the post. So, you know, I'm sure they have ways, I mean, of distributing this thing, but it's just a point to consider, you know, but I think that might be like a fraction of the thing. I don't think most people going through all the trouble, they might just discount all around the torrent. But it's just, you know, so you have more information to the problem.
Yeah, because I did read that that's one of the ways they try to do it with the encoding, but that's like for the people who try to do like sales and they're into the real hardcore part of the trading for kids where they sell kids and stuff like that. So they send videos as, you know, a sample of the product, the poor child. So that level of like heavy encryption, that's different to just the normal peer-to-peer
Exactly.
offenders who just have a collection. Yeah.
Has there been any sort of you know, has like Dr. Hussein and your other collaborators on this, have they looked at or had conversations with offenders, particularly those who might have been caught with digital assets, like, you know, like to see what their MO was, you know, how were they sharing stuff, what were they doing, what were they getting stuff? Because I do know that like a lot of it now, well, maybe 4 years ago, but I do know that that there is like, you know, like the reliance on BitTorrent specifically to share stuff. You know, it's become more sort of like you have something and then it's like, you know, you okay, so so there was a time, like, let's look at like just porn in general, right? Like, and how you would share that essentially locally. So people would burn stuff onto DVDs and sell it outside of like a gas station or something like that, right? So that was going on essentially. You had a lot of that. And some of that, there was some underage kids in that essentially, right? So like things that were going on in schools, etc., right? So there was that. Then you had like people sharing stuff on like WhatsApp, like just like you have these lists and you share stuff, whatever it is. There was a huge network in UE a couple of maybe 2-3 years ago that was, you know, people were sharing stuff of girls. Is this being recorded? Okay, of girls, etc. And that was also so I'm just looking at the modalities of how the sharing is occurring, and I'm just curious as to the people that you're going after specifically, because child porn is like has been extended now to include I guess anything under the well. So the definitions now is well defined in the Sexual Offences Act, and it's a little bit broader now, and it'll be interesting to look at, you know, like the modalities and how actual people, you know, that have been caught, how have they been sharing it. Of course, there's a bias there because they probably did a poor job at covering their tracks and they got caught, but still, that'll be an interesting place to start from, just talking to people who are actually sharing and see what they're doing. Humans.
That's if they like, that's if they want to talk about it. And because usually like you would get the from when I was talking to my friend in criminal psychology, the thing is that a lot of times the perpetrators, the offenders, in a case where they go first, the first thing they address would usually be the child abuse itself, because that's like the case that they would get reported. And then the first thing they try to do is to see if it's real, like a real case. So they interview more people, more like witnesses, as like the first thing they would do. And then in some cases, they actually found photos of the child in question. That is like one of the most valid cases, and is more what they're looking for in this case, like to match a person to that case. But when it comes to the sharing behavior, or to what extent, like if it's more like, well, it may not be DVDs as much now, but it could be like, but before it was like DVDs, CDs, hard copies of stuff. Actually, a lot of them still do have a lot of hard copies. It's part of the collection thing. So they do love to take a lot of photos, and it can even be photos of school kids and stuff like that. Now, locally, the people they try to look at is it's kind of like a small pool. They look at the people immediately near the child, which is like the parents, the uncles or aunts, and like close friends of the family. But they haven't put the same emphasis, from what I've found so far, on to categorize their preferences, like their behavior, and do they document the child or the prey, well, the child, and if so, to what extent? Because the reason they explain for New Zealand why they like to document it in that way, like to look at the patterns of the type of content. If it's video, if they like to share it like through chat or whatever, is because that helps them to see any escalation patterns. So even though the charge could be for someone under a certain age of 16 or whatever, it can be a no charge, basically, in some instances where it was harmless, in a, like a 15-year-old or 16-year-old. But then you have it in a way where it's escalated and it's violent and abusive, or it gets, you had their rank it in extremities. So when it's like a younger kid, 3-year-old, and it's gruesome. So in our case, I actually have no idea of the like categories of the type of material we have locally. And that's actually, yeah.
And so maybe one of the things you could do is probably like, because there's that problem, you could probably start with like a more general sort of a investigation, and look at just porn in general, and try and classify how porn is shared. And you could then assume from that child porn would be a subset. You could say probably that, like people who, are child offenders start with porn, and it's a gateway. I don't know, just saying, so if you look at just the way pornography is kind of shared, and maybe that more data, and then you could probably, that could probably lead you along, that could probably be a way to start, essentially. Just look at how porn is shared in general in Trinidad, and what it is. And so then you could probably say, well, if for instance, like one region has like a lot of porn compared to other regions, then, I think it's a fair assumption to say that maybe, the percentage of child porn that or the incidence rather or the occurrence of the, digital sharing of child porn might be higher in that as well. So it might conform to what you find with just the way porn is shared in general. And that could be an argument that I think you could defend, or you could make. And that could be a starting point. They say when you have a problem, you can't solve it, you embed it into a more difficult problem. And
yeah, because I actually was looking at, when I was doing the clustering, in an attempt to have a contingency plan in case I don't get enough classifications of the child pornography, I was going to do some sort of clustering based on regular pornography, and then to learn more on a different study about Trinidad. But in that case, if I do, I taking a bit of advice from the way New Zealand looks at it, I would put that in a separate study, just so that I don't overlap the child pornography, which they categorize as child abuse imagery with regular adult pornography, because I don't want to desensitize people to the seriousness of it with the kids. So we can do it in a way where we're adding the regular pornography preferences of the child pornography users in a way to help profile them if we see any preferences in what they like in different categories of regular porn, because most likely they wouldn't, because they don't really like anything above puberty age or so. But it'll be interesting to see the general download clusters. That's actually what I'm interested into, just the general clusters, like what else are they into, what normal PG books or TV shows they're into. And this is like not on the topic, but another aspect I would have liked to look into with the information from the Torrent titles would be, we have the most viewed things and that data from on Flow and for Netflix and stuff like that, but we don't have what people want to see. So it can be, we can see like what shows are being most downloaded, and this is normal stuff, normal shows, and that can give us a gauge, like it can help improve our recommendation system maybe for Trinidad and Tobago. That's just another way I was looking at using the same data. Or like different age groups in Trinidad. So like if kids seem to be really into something that you actually don't have on TV, but you may not have assumed in Trinidad they would be that into it. It's just a way to improve a recommendation system for Trinidad. But that's just another way to use the data. I was just trying to find useful ways for it to learn things. Anything else?
Yeah, so one thing that came to mind right there was talking was if you pull up, if you have a way you could extract a pattern for normal traffic on like non-child porn traffic, then you should be able to just subtract that from the torrent data that you scrape, and at least it should at least enhance the things that are more likely to be child porn stuff.
That's actually true. That can help with when I have to do the classification.
Yeah.
Because I know at first it will be kind of vague and the numbers wouldn't be too good. So,
another thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, another thing I was thinking about, which I don't know, some maybe more difficult to do, was if we could do like an agent-based model for people using torrents, and I don't know if you could figure out from a psychological point of view, or just law enforcement experience in coming here to can we model the behavior of a child porn person, and then put it through simulation, generate the network traffic, and see what patterns emerge from there. So that way you kind of study the sharing patterns of child porn stuff under certain assumptions. So hopefully, we can at least, it should look at least a little bit different from normal sharing, I suppose. I don't know, that has a lot of vagueness in it, so I don't know how useful it would be. But the basic idea is to try and generate simulated data for the problem, because it's not like we have a huge data set of people sharing porn, right? So the idea is to simulate that data. That's the big idea.
Okay. I'll think about that for sure, because I didn't think about that before, and maybe see how it could be done in practice.
I think, I agree with Chris. If you can get good local rules for how they behave, then maybe we can simulate like more global behavior. Probably that might help.
Yeah, that's actually what I'm thinking about it, because I find it's really interesting. So I'll spend some time thinking about it, because that could be a good way to step forward with it, to kind of make up for the fact that we wouldn't have like the ideal data set. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, no problem.